Why do I barely use my Canon EOS M50 to take pictures, even though I have it? Is a question I have asked myself recently. Why is the graph of me taking pictures from beginning in around 2012, that's now 12 years ago, going from this here to basically this once I got the EOS M50. Now, one of the first things that comes to mind is this. Every time I want to take it out of the camera bag, I take it out and then I try to turn it on. And often it does not turn on. Now it does turn on actually right now, but it often does not turn on. Why? Because I often haven't used it, but also because compared to the Canon EOS M70, not M70, but 70D actually, the battery is significantly smaller, which means that every time, so not every time, but every now and then when I take it out of the bag, I cannot rely on the camera actually working. So in order to then make sure that it actually is working whenever I need it, I need to always be on the charging side of the batteries. So I now have also multiple batteries. I also have this charger. I think in total I had already 3 or 4 batteries, and in the beginning I did not get that many batteries because I didn't know whether I would stick with this camera, and also right now I cannot find them. So if I now would try to shoot pictures for 2 hours, then I just don't know where the batteries are. Where are the batteries? Maybe they are in here. So it's already kind of the same situation again. And even though I try to prepare all of this again and again and again, it doesn't really matter because the batteries just are not that good. I got one Canon battery and then a couple of replacement batteries from Amazon, which often aren't that good, but this is, I think, then also, of course they are not good because the Canon battery is already quite small, and if you then take a Canon battery and replace it with a third-party battery, then it is kind of a small battery, which then has maybe significantly also less capacity because it's a third-party battery and they are often not as good. I actually found now a second battery, so I now have the Canon battery, but I also have the Canon EOS M50. Now, in terms of the history of me shooting with DSLRs, it began in 2012 with a Canon 60D that was the one of my father. I then, for my 18th birthday, actually got a 70D, which was quite expensive, so for all and everything I paid actually around 700 for the camera and then 300 for a zoom lens 18 to 200 millimeters. Now, the zoom lens also later would turn out to have a problem, which was that it was using UFS as a zooming mechanism, which meant that you couldn't really shoot video with it because either you focused manually or you used the autofocus, or at least you couldn't shoot video basically with yourself because, well, you couldn't set the focus really, or you could set the focus, but only manually, because if you used the focus, then you would have the noise of the focusing mechanism basically on the microphone on the camera, so you would have an additional mic. And so this, for quite some time actually, somewhat prevented me from, at least that's what I think it did, from making videos for basically the internet, which I wanted to do for a couple of years, but I just didn't know how, because this was the previous camera. I then also got the 70D. I then also got new lenses, so this is still the lens I have. It's an STM lens, which means the focusing motor is kind of quiet. But now, why do I not? So this is the one side, the video side of the camera. I barely use the 70D that I had before for video usage, and I also now barely use the M50 for video. Why? Because now, the big advantage of cameras still is that you can have lenses on them. And lenses can optically zoom, which means whenever you zoom in, you don't really lose quality. Apart from the picture quality you lose by having the lens moving and so on and so forth. But what a digital camera also does, often does, and often does if there are not multiple cameras with multiple basically zooms or zoom widths on a smartphone, for example, then it crops the picture in. So if you have a full HD picture in the beginning and then it crops in, then you actually don't have full HD any longer because you only have whatever is cropped out. Now this camera here also has 4K, but the thing is that even though I tried multiple times to use this actually also for shooting video, similar to how I'm shooting video right now, I just never really could establish a workflow. There were multiple reasons for this. First of all, if I record with the internal mic here, then the internal mic does not sound very good. So I would need an external mic, which I can also plug in on this mic here. But then the camera amplification of the signal basically happens to be just not that good. So if I instead would use my phone, for example, and I would use this as a camera, not a camera amplification, but a signal amplification, then it would boost the audio a little bit better. And I also could use my phone with USB connection. So basically I could use an external microphone and connect it via USB to my phone, but also with the old headphone jack, which also acts as an audio input. Now, what I mostly wanted to talk about is the photography side. So this was now a slight deviation into the video side. I wanted to talk about the photography side. I used to take lots and lots of pictures whenever I was somewhere. Whenever I was basically in a foreign city, I would take my camera and I would take lots of pictures. Not so much for. I just wanted to take pictures for the sake of taking pictures. Now there also might be different things associated with this and how this also changed. Now I began to try to make money out of taking pictures a couple of years ago. Now till now this has been mostly unsuccessful. I am still selling a picture every now and then online, because I am to a certain extent selling pictures online, but I still haven't gone through all of my catalog with all of the pictures I have. Now there is also the cost of having to be subscribed to Lightroom, because I began taking RAW pictures instead of JPEG pictures, which also increased basically the back-end workflow. So taking a picture would now not only mean taking a picture, but also mean, okay, I now have to import this to Lightroom, and I also have to have storage space for the infinity of time, because I take a certain amount of pictures in a certain amount of time. So there is an ever-increasing need for storage, and it seems to not be the case that storage in the last years went through the roof in terms of the cost, or in terms of the how much storage you get per unit of currency, basically. So what I'm trying to say is the storage did not get that much cheaper, at least in the last years. Now, I also want to discuss a few different things that are now specific to the M50. And so one of the first things that came to mind is the problem with the batteries. I now can find two batteries. I already had multiple batteries. I actually think that I threw the last two ones away because they basically enlarged, so they kind of blew up, and I didn't want I didn't want them to blow up in my camera, so I actually threw them away. So I would have to now order the third pair of batteries, because I cannot find these other two, and I now already have two chargers, one for my home, one for this camera. So if I would now switch the camera, which I actually recently considered, of course there is also a cost associated to switching the camera, then I would also have to change all the different things that are only suitable for the Canon EOS M50, such as this case, which I bought in order to prevent scratches, in order to be able to resell it at a higher price with having less scratches. I also got these adapters. So the Canon EOS M50 has this very special mount, which is the M mount. Now, because I already thought maybe I will get eventually back to the normal mount, the EFS mount, I think it is called, I would not buy specific lenses for the EOS M mount. So I would get these adapters, which also means now I have two different adapters. One is basically just a normal adapter, and both adapters I have from this brand from China, which is called Valtrox. And so I have, for once, a speed booster, but also a normal adapter. The speed booster actually kind of does a couple of things to the image, so it seems to zoom in a little bit more. At least that's what I think I remember. Now I read this up multiple times, and then, okay, what does this do, and what does this do, and can I have this lens or this lens? But what I eventually realized is that on the speed booster, I could only have, I think EFS lenses. So the EFS lenses are the ones with the point, and I actually, as of right now, cannot remember if... So the normal lenses, which adapt to the proprietary Canon normal camera thing, which would be for full frame, I think are called EF, and then for the APS-C they are called EFS, if I remember this correctly. So I also now have the second adapter, which is basically for the rest of the lenses, and it doesn't distort the image in some way or another. So I basically now have this here. Even though now the camera, the EOS M50, is significantly smaller, I now also have to have this. And this also means that I have to have this lens, and then I want to apply this lens to this here, which then also works. Which also means that I have more creative control for this lens. This is a 50mm lens. It's also an STM lens, which means it also is silent in zoom, and I can adapt it both to the speed booster, which is this one, and to the normal lens, which means I have two different lengths. But it also means I have to think about this all the time. Previously, I had a 18-200, and this was then multiplied with the 1.6 crop factor, which means the image is actually more zoomed in because the sensor is a little bit smaller, which means the projected image that goes onto the camera itself, so whatever the lens projects onto here, is actually a little bit bigger than the sensor. And this was true for the Canon EOS 70D, but this is also true for the M50, unless you get a full frame. But then this also means that you have to have bigger zoom lenses, because they have to have more glass in them, because they need to actually zoom in more, because they don't have the 1.6 crop factor, which multiplies basically all the different widths you have on here, or I don't know exactly what these are called, and doesn't multiply them, so you would have to have bigger zoom lenses, which also is kind of a downside. So I have been thinking, I started a false thread, a thread I don't want to follow, a thought thread I don't want to follow. Now, the next thing that actually already was kind of apparent. Now, there were a couple of decision factors with getting the Canon EOS M50. One big one was price. The Canon EOS M50 cost me, I think, 370 euros refurbished. So this meant that I could get it at around half of the price. A Canon EOS 80D, also refurbished, which would have been the next generation from the 70D, would have cost me. And this meant that I would save a couple of €100, which was significant. I already had the lenses from before. I also maybe have to mention that I broke basically all of my lenses and my camera before. Now, this happened over a couple of years, but I broke my 70D. I had it hit the floor 2 times, and at the second time it did stop working properly after a couple of weeks and months. And I also broke the first 18-200. I then broke the 18-200 of my father. I had to also replace this lens, and I also had to find a replacement for the 18-200 I used to own. But I also have now this downside. So previously, I used to work with a hobby, basically, with a 70D that had an 18-200 multiplied by the 1.6 crop factor. So the 18 multiplied by 1.6 are, I think, approximately 24 millimeters, which is around what the eye sees in terms of how much it zooms into the image. And then I had the 200, which multiplied by 1.6 seemed to be 320 millimeters. So this is quite a little bit of zoom. So if you go to the zoo, for example, then you could basically zoom in quite a bit. But I cannot with this lens. Now, I got this lens specifically to be able to shoot video, because this is a silent one, and there is no silent one with 18-200 unless you maybe go for the L lenses. But in terms of price, this was just not an option for me. The L lenses are, or had been, because now Canon is kind of promoting, or at least kind of switching to the mirrorless cameras, which also this is a mirror of. And so now there is a different mount, which is, I think, the R mount. So R with an R instead of the old EF mount. Now, the old EF mount maybe also was not in the high-end cameras, but I don't know specifically about this, but I think so. So there were also, I think the normal EOS mount was also with maybe high-end cameras to be found, which used then Canon lenses. For example, the RED, if I remember this correctly, RED are cameras that are often used, or sometimes used in cinema productions. I think a couple of Marvel movies were shot on RED cameras. And they sometimes, I think, used Canon bayonet, or whatever it is properly called and or pronounced, which would be this ring, which the lenses adapt to. Now, this could also be totally wrong, but I think that I remember something like this. Now, there is something else I wanted to mention, and the something else is when I first used this camera. I got into a tech store, and previously I was used to looking through this mirror here, and this mirror would actually be the actual image I could see. So a camera that is not mirrorless actually has a mirror. And this mirror basically reflects the light that comes in here and projects it up to the second mirror here, which is then, I think, in this direction. And then you can actually see what you are seeing. In smaller pocket cameras, you would actually have kind of a second lens up here that would not show the image, but it would only show kind of an image that was not exactly the same. So you would often have things in frame which you didn't think that are in frame, or you would cut out things. At least that happened to me a couple of times. But a mirror, a DSLR, a camera with a mirror basically, I actually don't know what it stands for. I cannot remember it right now. But the main differentiation is that a mirrorless camera kind of only tries to simulate this by having a screen up here. Now, as I first looked through the Canon EOS M50 in this tech store, I was like, oh no, this is total crap, because I don't want to take pictures like this. But then I didn't know what the other options would be. I could get an 80D again, but I also had this idea. What if I made taking pictures kind of less of a thing? And less of a thing would mostly mean that I would have a smaller camera. And I could take it with me. I could also fit multiple things into this bag, including all the different lenses I had, because the Canon EOS 70 was quite a little bit bulkier. And now this is already quite a little bit bulkier because I now have this grip, this rubber case on here. But still, there is also something to be said. I mean, I'm 6 feet tall, and my hands are somewhat accordingly also somewhat bigger, or depends on what your comparison is. But if I grab this, this is just not really a good grip. And now it is a little bit better with this rubber case. This is also one thing to mention. Now there might be this big downside that you have to carry around this bigger camera all the time, but this also seems to be sometimes an upside if I can actually grab my camera much better than I can grab this camera. This is, I think, even worse with other cameras. So this camera still has kind of this pronounced grip here, whereas other cameras, such as the Sony cameras, sometimes had grips where you just didn't know where actually to grab this camera. Especially then if you have a lens on here that is not just a small lens, but actually a bigger lens. And because I now have to have this adapter on here, I also have to have basically a bigger in total lens. Now, one might say that whatever I saved in terms of space or volume of the camera itself is now basically on here, because I have to have this adapter on here all the time. And this also, I think, complicates things, because I constantly... So first of all, I want to take my camera back because I just want to take a couple of pictures. Then I don't know if the batteries are charged, and if they are charged and I haven't used my camera in 3 weeks, then at least the batteries that aren't Canon are usually then somewhat discharged, and when I take it out, then after 10 minutes the battery is basically dead. If I additionally would try to shoot video, then it would be kind of even worse. With the 70D I had two batteries. I think that's in total, or maybe I had 3 in total ever, and this also would last me for a couple of hours. For example, I did a couple of portrait shoots in the forest with somebody else, and the batteries just lost it. Also maybe because the display wasn't constantly running, so on the back side there was only the display or the dark settings you have that are displayed here, or you can have displayed here. But with this here I found myself a lot more often also shooting through the display. Now there also have been a couple of other issues, especially when trying to shoot video. I often had the image just being overexposed, and this was kind of I just didn't know really what this was, and I couldn't really find out. This is just something else, maybe also. Now there also might be a case that the Canon EOS M50 compared to the 70D is kind of a lower tier camera, so maybe they are not very comparable. Also, it just costs less, so the 80D at this point in time would have also cost me quite a lot. I think I also have the EOS M50 and not the EOS M52, so this will also already be out, so this might be a little bit better on the Canon EOS M50 M2. Now, what I now also again want to mention is, and I want to come back to this, is looking through this here and then seeing the actual image. Like, if you have a camera with a mirror, a DSLR, then you are actually seeing the actual reflection of whatever you're standing in front of. But if you have it like this, then it now took it takes a little bit of time to switch. I can actually also show you, because there is a sensor that also switches this. I mean, this is not that big of a deal, but if you are sitting in a sightseeing bus and there is this thing that is going by, then with the 70D I often would try to shoot it. But with this camera it's just resignation, because I just am not able to shoot this fast, because it is just the latency of the software. If you're standing in front of a mirror and you're doing this and you're doing this, it's just different compared to standing in front of a camera, for example, my Galaxy S10, which I have here, and then looking at myself on my screen. There is just a little bit of latency if I move my hands up or do anything, really. And the same is true for seeing the world through basically this screen, which you then have up here. It is somewhat decent, one could say. Of course, it could be a lot worse. And it actually is not that bad. Even it was not that bad. I think I bought this camera in around 2019, 2020 or 21. I can't remember exactly as of right now. But compared to the other cameras, the Sony 7S2, for example, there was also an R2, the 7S3 and the 4 versions, I think already also have been out. And I also looked through basically the screen on these cameras, and it was not that much better, actually, and at least it seemed to me. So this initial thought of, okay, I don't want to shoot pictures like this, turned into, or maybe because it's so small and because it can shoot 4K, at least in a certain setting, and also 60 frames per second in certain settings, actually somewhat convinced me. And I sent back the 80D I already had ordered, and now got this camera. And I am just frustrated, because it used to be such a thing in my life that I just would take pictures of everything. And I would also have this, I don't know, this joy in me to just take pictures of everything, because sometimes things just look so nice, and then you want to keep them forever on your hard drive and can be able to take a look at them again and again and again. It could be the family event you want to remember. It could be the birthday of somebody you just happen to take your camera with, to just document the whole thing a little bit for them, and maybe also have the pictures somewhat as a present, as a birthday present, because who else is taking pictures in somewhat decent quality? I mean, still smartphones were around, and of course the better smartphones get, the less value you have in taking your camera with you. But then if I have my camera with me, if I have this camera with me, and then I have it at a friend's birthday, for example, and I take it out of the bag, and then, well, I don't know if the batteries are charged because I forgot. It is just, there are so many hurdles, and then I have to remember whether I have this adapter on, or whether this is actually the speed booster or the other one. And then, okay, I take this off, but when I take this off, then I should cover this lens already. So I take this one here, and then I take this off, but then it doesn't fit because I have to have this lens. But then if I take this lens off, then, well, this is uncovered, and if I have this uncovered, no, this doesn't fit here. So if I have, okay, this does fit here, which is nice, but then I still need to, okay, I could take this, but then I still need to have a second lens for this here, not a lens but a lens hood, but this doesn't still fit, so this maybe fits on here, but I need to also now cover the front, so maybe I have this here on here, and then the situation you actually wanted to take a picture of is now already over, and this also doesn't fit, so I don't exactly know why, because this is the speed booster and not the other one. So maybe I have to have an additional lens cap, which maybe would be in here. No, here are the batteries. It's ridiculous. And of course this is also my own fault, because I now have a wide angle lens, because I now have a 50mm lens for shooting portraits, and I also now have a 18 to 135 instead of an 18 to 200, which would be the lens that covers it all, even if that comes with a slightly worse picture quality. Not only slightly worse, but the 50mm, which are 80mm with the 1.6 crop factor, are kind of a cinematic look. It's with this blurry background, and of course this also means, 80mm is quite zoomed in already compared to this here, with which you can also shoot maybe this room here. But if I want to shoot this room and also want to see different parts of this room, then I actually would need the wide lens. So I also got the wide lens. Of course, now I did not have these options before on the 70D, but on the 70D I had the 18 to 200. So maybe I should get rid of the STM lenses entirely and opt for the 18 to 200 again, because then I would have one lens at least that would kind of cover it all, that I would not have to constantly switch lenses. And every time you switch the lenses, there is just it just increases the exposure time of the sensor, which you then have to clean. So you have to have a set for the cleaning. You also have to maybe make sure that you clean it 3 times a year, or depending on how much you shoot. And also if you're switching lenses, then you also have to be aware of this and the pollen in summer, and that there might be dust in there, and so on and so forth. And the same is true for the back of all of these different lenses. But this is only now mostly because of having multiple lenses. So in total, I have almost taken no pictures. Now there also are a couple of different things I have to mention. So first of all, maybe on the video side again, I barely shot any video on this in the last couple of years. Everything I do for social media or for the internet, I record on a Galaxy S10. Now with OBS Studio, I also tried actually to make this a camera, to turn this into kind of a webcam, and this is now somewhat possible. So I got a dummy battery in order to have constant battery, and then I also had this cable which you then can connect via EOS Utility, and then you turn it on, and then every second time it doesn't work. So I eventually just quit this project and I just put it into the bag again, because I also have only one camera, and whenever I want to actually take pictures or videos outside, then I only have this camera. I also actually got a Rode video mic in order to have a video mic on here, in order to be actually able to shoot video, maybe for a friend or for somebody. But I now have this video on here because that was a kind of a better use, because then now I don't have to have a video mic on me, which is somewhat fortunate, because previously I used my Zoom H6 up there, which is a recording device which also has a microphone, and so I don't need to turn it on because this is now connected to my PC. But on the photo side, I just happen to not take any pictures at all. Whenever I visit my family, I just take my father's camera because, well, it is a 60D, and even though it does not have newer features, it still has a mirror in it, and it also has 2 batteries, of which if I both charge them, I don't need to charge the other one at the event I am attending or I'm trying to photograph or take pictures of, because, well, they just last a little longer compared to the EOS M50 batteries. So overall, there are just so many hurdles to using it as a photography camera, from switching all the different lenses, which might be also be caused by me, to the adapters I now have to use, which is also partially caused by me, but also there's this aspect where, because these sell probably at a higher volume and also resell at a higher volume, talking about these EFS lenses and EF lenses, it was just cheaper to get them compared to EOS M lenses, and there is also less of a variety in terms of the EOS M lenses, which would be smaller, which would additionally bring down basically the size of this, but it would not allow me to eventually maybe switch back to another camera, which then would use EF or EFS, depending on APS-C or full frame. So the sensor size, speaking of. And so once I then have it charged and then look through this, and then it takes a split of a second in order to then I take it, and then no. So and then you actually see the picture. And so all of this has led to me basically taking almost no pictures apart from family events basically in the last couple of years. And this is kind of sad, because it was such a big part of my life at least a couple of years ago. Maybe I also have less time for this, maybe I try to also make videos instead of taking pictures, and yeah, well, that's the end.